applications. So that combined with the plugin system and theme system for WordPress started to mean people were using WordPress for ever more powerful things I never would have imagined, including using it for more than just a blog. So sort of, call it 05 to 08 was really interesting because WordPress became a CMS, not because we added a bunch of kitchen sink CMS features, but because now more than half the new people using WordPress every day use it to power their entire website, not just their blog. And that's been a pretty cool trend.
Can you talk a little about the intricacies between WordPress.org and WordPress.com? I know that you recently gave the trademark WordPress to the WordPress Foundation. What were the motivations behind that decision?
Sure, that was kind of a tricky one because, WordPress.org started as an open source project, and still is to this day. You go to WordPress.org, you download the software, it's completely GPL and free and open source. But sort of where we were in 05-ish is I was like, WordPress was starting to get more popular, but wasn't really sure what would take it to the next level. Like we saw the software that was pretty good, but you had to know FTP and PHP and all this sort of stuff to get it running. So like, what if we can make it one-click simple? What'll happen? And we called that WordPress.com. And the good news is the experiment went well. There's been a lot of people, millions and millions of people who started blogging since then. But there was always this sort of dichotomy where we had these two things called WordPress. So what we wanted to do, it was tricky as a company because obviously WordPress is an incredibly valuable trademark. It's grown very prominent over the past few years. What we did is we really looked at it, and I give credit to Toni here for really working with the board and everything, and said, well, this started in the open source, and really, if we want this to be something that's bigger than Automattic, that lots of companies use, that outlives us all, it really belongs in a nonprofit foundation. So we went through all the work and everything to actually take the trademark from Automattic and donate it to the WordPress Foundation.
What are some of the challenges of trying to build a viable business off something that is open source? Business person?
Sure. Actually, I think the biggest challenge initially was to start a business that wouldn't kill the open source project. I think we see this a lot where something starts in open source, it gets popular, somebody tries to turn it into a business, and the community doesn't like it and goes away. So this is the reason why we set the business up separate from the open source project. And really our goal has been to make the two work together and reinforce each other. And it has worked because from the time when Automattic has become a very running a very large service and has become very popular, the open source project in parallel has grown tremendously as well.
So how big is WordPress?
So
big WordPress.
Yeah, I have all kinds of stats for you.
Tell me how big it is.
There are about 30 million people using WordPress today, about 30 million publishers. That's about 10% of all the websites in the world are powered by WordPress at this point. Of the 30 million, half of them are hosted by us, WordPress.com. The other half are using the open source software. And on WordPress.com, those blogs we host, we can measure the audience of those blogs, and that's approaching about 300 million unique visitors a month.
Okay, so that's huge.
It's big, and the growth is accelerating. We have, I just looked this up the other day, the first million blogs on WordPress.com took us 18 months to get there. The last million took 35 days. So the curve is going up very rapidly now.
Up and to the right. Are you making any money on this exceptional growth?
We don't really talk about our revenues in public. We've been focusing on growth, both our team and our audience, and really investing in the infrastructure to make all that happen, and growing a company to make all that happen. So we haven't been focused on revenues. We will be in the coming years, but what we usually tell people is that we're breaking.
Okay, so you're breaking even. How big is your team?
We have 74 people right now.
74 people. So that's about $1 million in revenue a month, correct? Estimate using the 12,000 to employee rule.
The more interesting thing I think
no?
we haven't really figured out, blogging hasn't really seen its AdWords yet, right? We don't know what that is. And so while we have revenue, while we're growing things, you haven't found that sort of breakout product success yet. I think that's still what we're figuring out his company as well. We have this thing that a lot of people love, but do we have WordPress users here in the audience? Any WordPress users? Yay. Nice, especially this section. We have something people love, and I think that's a good baseline. And so we just need to make that better and better every day. And over time, we'll figure out where we provide the most value that is commensurate commercially.
So most of those revenues in the ballpark of $1 million, they're coming from WordPress VIP hosting. I know TechCrunch is on it. Nope.
No.
How does that fit with your monetization?
Yeah, I can talk about that. So most of our revenue comes from WordPress.com. That's our main product. As you said in the introduction, we have a bunch of other products. They're making money as well. And our main revenue model is premium services. So they can start a blog for free, and then we have services to buy a domain, to buy more storage for your blog, to buy spam protection, all kinds of different upgrades. And so that's our main business model. And then at the very high end of those premium services, what we call VIP hosting. So what TechCrunch is on, for example, where we run large media sites properties. So we run blogs for CNN and companies like that.
Sylvester Stallone is on WordPress. Yeah. Yes, I read that on your blog. So why have you never been acquired? I know you had an offer from Velocity a couple years ago, but haven't heard any news about that since.
Our goal is not to be acquired, so that's probably a good reason, first and foremost. We're also kind of a quirky little company. We're a technology company that gives away all its intellectual property. We're distributed, so the 74 people, I think, are in 66 different cities around the world. We're a little odd in a lot of ways, but long term, our hope is that we can find revenues and growth to the point where we don't need to be acquired, because I feel like the web really does need a strong, independent voice here for publishing, if nothing else. Because if you look at it, I've been fascinated with this sort of adjacent possibilities theory. And part of that is when WordPress came into existence, there was no alternative. There was no open source alternative that did everything that the proprietary systems did. And so if it wasn't WordPress, I actually believe that some other open source CMS would have filled that space. And it's the same thing today. We're back in this cycle where everything's becoming closed again. AOL keywords are back, the equivalents, modern day. And the web needs something open. And the fascinating thing is, if you look at it as a whole, we were talking about this with traffic the other day. Like, the top referrers for a lot of the big sites are Facebook, Twitter, everything like that. But if you look at that, there's an other that often has 4x, 5x what Facebook will send in a day in terms of traffic. And we just started to quantify sort of the non-WordPress.com blogs and sort of to get a more sense of the .org audience. We just started a few weeks ago. It's already up to 450 million. And by the end of the month, we'll know exactly how big that is. But you have something that's Facebook size out there, but it's spread across millions and millions of domains, so it's difficult to think about, it's difficult to talk about. There's sort of this dark matter of the web that has a huge gravitational force, and what we want to figure out is how to unify that, how to provide people with the independence, both at the license and legal level from open source, to all the way to the flexibility. We make it as easy to get your data out as it is to put it in, and see where to go from there. Because I think there's that's where some of the most interesting stuff on the web is happening.
What are plans for some new features in stuff like Gravatar or an intense debate that can possibly unify people across that dark matter of internet blogosphere?
I mean, that's the big question. Right now we have probably 15, 20 plugins out there that do all sorts of different things. Just cool, like After the Deadline, which is sort of a contextual spell checker. So if you said he was ahead in the polls, but you spell it differently, you can figure that out, and it reads the Wikipedia to get smarter and smarter. Like, it's a crazy system. That makes you a better writer. So it's completely aligned with our goals, is making you the author sort of our primary user, you, Alexia. But
Alexia at Tsotsis.com is a WordPress blog.
But we have a lot of these, and I've been thinking a lot about the user experience of that. Because right now, you sign up for Intensivate and you go through that process. You sign up for WordPress to secure your blog and you go through that process. I'm wondering if there's something where we can sort of put all this together and just provide just more of like a I don't want to call it an app store experience because it's not that at all, but just something where you have something you can drop in your WordPress. It just adds all this really cool stuff that we built, especially for WordPress.com. So there's really no difference between WordPress.com and WordPress.org in terms of the features you get. Because right now there's trade-offs. Like .org, you have plugins and themes, whatever you want. On .com, you get Facebook Connect and Twitter Publicize and like all these other cool things that, quite honestly, are difficult to do in a completely distributed fashion. So at heart, I'm a distributed guy, but I think some of this, like search is a good example. Just your $5 a month web host is not going to run like an enterprise level, really great search engine for your blog. They just can't. They're not going to be able to transcode video. We built the web scale infrastructure to do that because we do it for WordPress.com for millions and millions of people every day. So connecting those. I don't know what that looks like, but we're working on it.
So we're out of time, but one last question. Top 2 plugins?
I'll plug one of our own.
Blackbird Pie.
I'm gonna say WordPress, which is adds security to your WordPress blog.
I think my favorite is called WP. I believe it's called WP Typography, which is good. So WordPress, I started coding because of curly quotes essentially, like when you type the prime and double prime mark on your keyboard, and it's not like real quotes. So that was like my first ever code thing. And so we have a lot of typography stuff built into WordPress. Like if you type 3 periods in a row, it turns into a proper typographic ellipsis. And if you do space, dash, dash, space, it turns into an M dash, things like that. But there's this one that goes like above and beyond. Like it takes, for example, it inserts non-breaking spaces between the last 2 words of your title, so you don't have a widow. You don't have one word all on its own in the title, which drives me nuts. So I love that this, people in the WordPress
so nerdy.
who are even more anal
so
than I
nerdy.
am. Well, you guys have it. You guys will never have a word on its own line as long as you're at WordPress.com, because it's just one of those things we built in. Like, we obsess about these things so you don't have to.
Thank you. Did you obsess about the double plaids on your shirt here? This is really impressive. As someone who loves fashion, I think that you are rocking it for all content blog owners across our whole industry. Thanks. All right. Bye.